Hi everyone, welcome back to our podcast series. We're exploring the key issues shaping the world of employment law and HR best practice in 2025. My name is Jess, I'm an employment lawyer and PSL here in the team at VWV.
Hello, I'm Sarah. I'm an HR consultant and director at Narrow-Key HR. Today we're going to be talking about something that's on many employers' minds right now, and that is pay and reward.
Absolutely. So obviously with rising cost and pressures of retaining talent and of course the need to stay legally compliant, organisations, a lot of them are thinking about how they approach pay. And it's no longer just about how much to pay staff, but also you need to think really carefully about how pay decisions are communicated and managed.
Yes, good communication and the way that employers handle that can make all the difference between smooth transitions and employee pushback.
So in this episode, then, we're going to look at some practical options that employers are considering in terms of pay. So that can be things like targeted pay increases, making temporary allowances as opposed to permanent increases, and looking at things like performance-related pay. And we'll touch on salary sacrifice schemes and also the importance of tone and managing communications around these types of issues really carefully, because it's obviously quite a sensitive area. Okay, so should we start then with some of the options that employers are looking at then with considering pay and managing pay? So given the pressures on budgets, some employers are moving away from blanket pay rises and they're opting for more nuanced approaches, aren't they?
Yeah, so targeted pay increases are one strategy. So what that means is that you might choose to increase pay for only certain groups. So perhaps you're really high performers who you've determined are really crucial for business success, or maybe you've got employees in roles where the market's particularly competitive and turnover risk as a consequence is high. And so an approach like that can help you to manage costs whilst rewarding people who matter the most in your business.
Yeah, I think that is true. I think it's probably also worth, though, just mentioning here the importance of thinking that through very carefully as an approach in order to mitigate possible legal risks that could present themselves if you're not careful. So the risk of an equal pay claim if targeted pay increases aren't implemented fairly, for example. Another approach that I've seen some employers take is this use of what they call, a temporary pay allowance rather than a permanent pay rise. These are typically short-term payments and they might be in place for the next 12 months or so on, and then the allowance would come to an end. So the aim there is to have the effect of giving employees some extra pay to help obviously manage cost of living or just help with retention, but you're doing that on a temporary basis.
Yeah, and so the big advantage with that, of course, is flexibility. So that can provide a boost and some financial support, but doesn't lock an employer into permanent salary increases. So that is quite useful if there's a bit of an uncertain economic outlook and you don't want to fully commit to a permanent pay increase.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, another thing that we are seeing is we're seeing a renewed interest in linking pay to performance, and you can do that in various ways. But broadly speaking, a performance-based pay structure is ensuring you are linking any pay increase directly to measurable outcomes. And that, again, that can be through a salary increase or indeed through pay such as bonuses and commission. And those types of tools really help drive productivity. Another thing that we are seeing is employers thinking about other ways of rewarding staff. So if budget is a constraint, which it will be for lots of employers, can you combine a smaller pay increase with something that's really valuable that's a non-monetary benefit? So that can be around, your wellness program offering, it can be some additional leave, flexible working arrangements, something that's going to make a difference to staff in terms of lifestyle, but isn't going to cost you as much as a larger pay increase would.
I would really encourage employers to think very carefully about that kind of thing, because I think some of those benefits, non-monetary benefits, can be of real value to employees without significantly increasing payroll costs. And, what ties all of those things together is the need to really think creatively and strategically so that you can adapt as circumstances change. And we all know that flexible working is really high on the priority list for some employees entering the workforce. So I would really suggest that's something that businesses consider.
And I think another option that some employers are exploring increasingly is salary sacrifice arrangements. So those are where employees agree to reduce their salary in exchange for non-cash benefits. Typically it's been for perks like cycle to work schemes. Increasingly they're for higher ticket items such as, electric cars and things like that.
Yeah, salary sacrifice is definitely something that can be really effective. But as you will know more than me possibly, Jess, there are legal considerations to take into account in terms of the salary sacrifice schemes.
Yeah, that's true. So I think crucially, the fact that a salary sacrifice arrangement can't bring an employee's pay below a national minimum wage, you also need to put the right paperwork in place so that you're documenting and agreeing your salary sacrifice arrangements, particularly to protect the employer in the event that an employee leaves partway through the salary sacrifice period. So where it is a high ticket item like an electric car, for example, what's going to happen to the car and to any lump sum that's due if somebody were to leave during the term of the salary sacrifice deal.
I think the message there, Jess, is if you're thinking about going down that route, make sure you get some advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Shall we move on to talk about communication then in pay matters? Because, I think how pay decisions are communicated really can make or break whether or not ultimately they're going to be accepted by your staff. So the tone you use when discussing pay matters is really, really important.
Yeah, tone is critical in these types of situations. And if the messaging is clear, it's empathetic, it's transparent, employees are far more likely to understand the business rationale and accept that there might be limitations. So, if you explain why a pay increase might be modest and help your employees to see the bigger picture, that can help in reducing feelings of unhappiness or unfairness.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think the opposite is also true in terms of, poor communication, which can be, vague messaging or corporate, language, buzzwords, or just messaging that comes across as dismissive or not as appreciating, the impact on personal circumstances. All of that can really fuel frustration and mistrust amongst a staff body.
Yeah, and you see it all the time when there's a difficult message to be delivered. Often the temptation is to kind of get in, do it, and get back out again, and that can leave employees feeling like they're being spoken at rather than being listened to. And that just creates disengagement, conflict, and even in the most extreme cases can lead to people feeling like they've got no option but to use a formal internal process, such as a grievance procedure, to document why they're unhappy and get a result. And we see that so often. When there's a difficult message to be delivered, often the temptation can be to sort of get in, do it, and get back out again. And what that means is that employees feel like they're being spoken at rather than really listened to. And that really just goes to create conflict, disengagement, and in the most extreme cases can lead to an employee feeling like they've got no other option but to raise something formally in line with an organisation's formal grievance process. And that leads to further time and unhappiness all round.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think the key takeaway here is that the value of good communication really can't be overstated. So what you want to do as an employer is set clear expectations, explain the position that the organization finds itself in, provide opportunities for employees to ask questions, to raise concerns, and make sure you respond meaningfully when things are raised. And that's really going to just help maintain trust, especially when you've got a tough pay decision to take. It's probably worth just spending a minute just talking about the value of consultation, even when consultation isn't a legal requirement. As we've said in the past, it's sometimes viewed as a tick box exercise. So, if you don't technically have to consult, if you're not going through a formal process, why would you want to do it if it's not required by law? Okay, to sum up then, obviously having conversations about pay and perhaps adopting creative and different approaches to pay during times of economic challenge, that's not an easy topic to broach with staff, but ultimately if you can weigh up the cost, the compliance and the communication considerations, and really hit home with some really clear messaging and getting staff on board as much as possible, I think that's really how employers can help build stronger relationships with teams even during challenging times.
I totally agree. And those difficult conversations about pay don't have to lead to conflict. When they're handled really thoughtfully with care, and those having them have the confidence and skills they need, they can instead become opportunities to improve relationships and strengthen trust and loyalty.
Great, thanks Sarah, and thanks everybody for listening. If you found this episode helpful, please do share it with your network.
And we'll be back soon with more insights into employment law and HR best practice. Until then, take care.
Bye.